Attention parents, this episode of Maybe God contains adult content that may not be suitable for younger audiences.
We got a call from Child Protective Services that we were under investigation, and they asked us to come in for an interview. And of course, we panicked because we had no idea what we could possibly be under an investigation for. And real quickly figured out that it was me who was being accused of child abuse. And it was so shocking, and I could not figure out where it was coming from.
Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? I asked my followers on Twitter for their craziest false accusation stories, and I couldn't believe how shocking some of your stories were.
I told the interviewer, I said, this is crazy. This is not, I don't even spank my kids. And she said, your son was overheard saying, I want to kill my mom. And I said, well, that's very out of character for him. And he probably had just learned what kill means. And she was extremely accusatory. I think you're lying, she says. So it was so tense, so scary, honestly.
So I was a junior in high school, and I was called out of my English class, and I was told to report to the principal's office. As a goody two-shoes, I was really embarrassed and mortified that my classmates had heard me get called down to the principal's office, of all places. Once I was in his office, he accused me of vandalizing the women's restroom, which I absolutely had not done. He asked me several times to confess, and I just couldn't because I hadn't done it. We sat there for what felt like forever and just going back and forth. I kept denying. I kept telling him I had been in class, that he could check with my friends, check with everyone. They know where I was.
So I was in a fraternity, and I think I had been to this party for a minute, but I had to do something else, study or whatever, and so I left. And I hear later on that there had been, this fight, and I think the next day I start hearing whispers from fraternity brothers that the police are looking for me. So somehow I get into the police station, and they've got a yearbook. I did not know this then, but I know this now, that police and prosecutors, and there are no rules for them. They can say anything that they want to say and try to get you to confess to something. So they're telling me that the victim and that some other of my fraternity brothers have picked out my photo in this yearbook, and they're pointing to my picture, saying, you were there and you were the one that did this. And I said, well, that's absurd because I wasn't even there. That was scary. I'd never been in a police station, as an accused person. Just wild and anxiety, and just fear. And it was crazy.
Today on Maybe God, one of the most chilling and troubling cases of wrongful accusation you'll ever hear. It's the heartbreaking, gut-wrenching story of two young people in love who fought for justice against all odds and found God along the way.
I'm indifferent.
I believe in God.
To the existence of
God is not judging them.
I don't have proof.
I don't know how to pray.
They're judging themselves.
Where is God in all of this? This is my home.
God exists.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm?
I don't pledge allegiance to anything.
I don't pray.
Only to God.
If there was a God,
And I thought,
I just have this understanding that life is hard.
he could never love me after this.
God is still good.
You're listening to Maybe God. I'm Eric Huffman. A few months ago, Andrea Gentle, a Maybe God superfan turned producer, told our executive producer Julie about this Showtime docu-series called Outcry, which follows the case of Greg Kelley, a high school student who was accused of a truly monstrous crime. I started watching the series on a Friday afternoon, and I was so captivated that I watched all 5 hours of Outcry by Sunday night. I think what makes Greg's story so compelling is that it could happen to any one of us. In a world where accusations are so often litigated in the court of public opinion, and where legal authorities often double as ambitious politicians, anyone can be accused and found guilty of anything, with or without sufficient evidence. Any given day, any one of us can be wrongfully accused and, like Greg, be left to wonder, why is this happening to me? I'm so glad to see y'all.
Yeah, we're happy to meet you virtually.
Yeah, appreciate this.
Nice
to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet y'all. Does it ever? As I heard Greg and his then-girlfriend Gaebri tell their story on Showtime, I knew there was more going on than just a legal struggle. While the docu-series didn't quite capture it, it was obvious to me that Gaebri and Greg believed their battle was primarily spiritual. This is the side of their story that's never been told before, and it's something they've wanted to share for a long time.
My name is Gregory Kelley. I'm 25 years old. This is my beautiful wife, Gaebri. We are out of Austin, Texas.
Greg and Gaebri grew up in Leander, Texas, a fast-growing suburb 22 miles outside of Austin in Williamson County. Williamson County is a conservative, no-nonsense county that takes law enforcement very seriously. It's been said, if you're going to do it, don't do it in Williamson County.
We met in, I think it was 7th grade we met. We were becoming friends, and then we had a math class together, 8th grade, and instantly just hit it off as best friends. And from there, I mean, it was pretty crazy that we, started dating in 8th grade.
We were young, right? So we were flirting with each other, and a few short weeks later, I asked her to be my girlfriend, and we just started to get to know each other even more going in through high school.
Greg was a high school football star, and at the time, Leander boasted one of the best football programs in the state. To give you an idea of football's importance in Leander, the high school stadium seats 12,000 fans, but the big games still draw standing room only crowds. Greg was good enough to start for the varsity squad as a sophomore, and his coaches raved about his athleticism and his maturity.
His intelligence level, his physicalness, his size, those were all things that just pointed that he was going to be a really, really good football player for Leander High for his whole high school career.
Gaebri was more than just Greg's girlfriend. She was the captain of the Leander Bluebells, the high school dance team, and together they were the it couple on campus. How big a part of your life was football in high school?
It was really big. I come from a family where my dad worked really hard, my mom worked really hard. They provided for all 4 of my brothers, including me. I knew that I had to get a scholarship, and I loved playing sports, so I wanted to go and get it. And so in high school, I got really serious with just football and running track. I woke up every day, 5 a.m., go hit the gym, go practice, go to school, spend time with Gaebri, and do it all over again. So football was a huge part of my life in high school. I knew that it was the ticket to get me out of Leander and go be successful.
Right. Were you eyeing the NFL at that point in your life?
I was, yeah. I think it's almost every kid's dream that has college opportunities to hopefully go and make it to the NFL. And it's a whole lot of hard work, a whole lot of talent. And so I had a dream of making it to the NFL. I still actually do.
Gaebri and Greg shared that dream. Both were well on their way. During his junior year, Greg got full scholarship offers from Rice University, Texas State, and the University of Texas at San Antonio, enough to make any mom proud.
So my mom, she's a fantastic woman, one of the strongest women I've ever met in my life. She worked like a horse. I mean, she had her own house cleaning service for 30 years. I still remember as a kid, she used to take me with her to clean these houses and put me to work. And still to this day, I think a lot of the work ethic that I've learned was from her.
Greg's mom, Rosa, is an immigrant from Guatemala. Not only did she teach her sons about the value of hard work, she also wanted them to know God. So every Sunday morning, she dragged the boys to church with her. But Greg admits he rarely paid attention in church. He was always thinking about what they were going to eat afterward, or about his next football game.
Little did I know that even though I wasn't fully there were still seeds being planted into my life, these lessons to be learned that were exposed to me at such a young age. These things I learned were really going to make the difference on the tough road that I had ahead.
During Greg's junior year, both of his parents suffered major medical emergencies. His mom developed a brain tumor.
It was really devastating. It was really hard to come to grasp with that.
And his dad barely survived a stroke.
The biggest stroke that you possibly could get, it took away half the side of his body.
With both parents undergoing medical treatment outside of their home and his older brothers having already moved out, Greg was left to fend for himself.
Our house being about 20 minutes away from the high school, we lived out in the country. With my parents being gone, there was no way for me to get to school. So I had a friend at the time that I knew since middle school.
That friend was Jonathan McCarty. The McCarty house was the high school hangout where Greg and Gaebri spent a lot of time playing video games and hanging out with their friends. Jonathan was a sophomore, also a football player, and looked remarkably similar to Greg.
His mom, Shama McCarty, was a big football booster. So when she caught wind, knowing that both of my parents were medically ill, she offered to open up her home to me so I could continue to go to Leander High School.
When they came and offered that Gregory can come home with them, and I say, Shama, I say, well, let me think about. I remember she grabbed me from my shoulders and she said to me, Rosa, let me do this. She says, this is the way I get my blessings. Let me have my blessings.
So I decided to move in, and I moved in there for almost a year. And towards the end of that year, I got accused of a thing that completely derailed my life.
Fast forward to 2013, the summer before Greg's senior year of high school. In June, he signed with UT San Antonio and committed to play football there after graduating. His mom was getting better and she was back at home, so he moved out of the McCarty house and back in with her. Greg spent his summer days at strength and conditioning camp for athletes at Leander High. He'd been back with his mom for about a month when one afternoon, as he was leaving camp,
I checked my phone and I see a bunch of texts from my brother. And he said, hey, if you're thinking about coming to Shama's, don't. Because something's going on here. Some dad's here saying that you did something to his son. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. When I first saw that, I thought my brother was joking with me. But I soon realized that this was not a joking matter. I was actually getting accused of doing something to a child. I immediately called him and he reiterated what he said in the text. And I said, dude, I don't know what's going on, but who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to talk to let them know that you got the wrong guy? Why are you making these accusations up? And he said, don't, man, this guy's really mad. And next thing you know, a week later, I'm getting a call from the Cedar Park Police Department saying that, hey, this is Detective Daly. I need to talk to you, this and that. I was completely scared.
A 4-year-old boy who attended Shama's in-home daycare told his parents that Greg had molested him at the McCarty house. The outcry came at the end of July, weeks after Greg had moved back home. Greg claims he never went back to Shama's after moving out.
What exactly was the accusation?
The accusation was sexual assault of a child. They were accusing me of penetrating this kid with my genitals. And specifically, they were accusing me of sticking my penis in a kid's mouth. My brother told me that this is what the dad is saying that you did to this kid. And I immediately started crying. I immediately started getting angry. I was like, I don't know why somebody's accusing me of this. And it just seemed like this snowball effect was just getting worse and worse and worse because nobody was really trying to get down to the bottom of it. I think everybody was just getting fed up with the emotions on it and how severe it was, that nobody really wanted to seek the truth in this thing.
Yeah. So Gaebri, talk to me about what that day was like for you.
So he first actually went to my dad and pretty much explained what was happening. But I remember him calling me, and I don't think I really comprehended what he was saying because it was so out of this world and awful. And I pretty much just remember bawling my eyes out and like curling up into a little ball, and I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what was going to happen to him. I didn't know what was going to happen to us.
So can an 18-year-old mind comprehend how serious that is?
No, I did not understand the seriousness of the situation. I knew that getting accused of a sex offense is the most frowned upon thing in the world. So with that comes the worst thing that I thought of was, man, I do not want to go to prison, or I do not want to have my face plastered on the media, because at that point, I was a football player with a scholarship.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened. Turned from Greg Kelley, star football player at Leander High School, to Greg Kelley being accused of sexual assault of a child. That right there dang near made me want to not get up out of bed, because I was so depressed. I was so broken. I was so hurt.
Right. I can't imagine it. And especially in a world that's so connected digitally with Twitter and everything, like the accusations that people throw around, they never go away.
First, though, a local high school football player arrested on a child sex abuse charge.
The Leander High School student is accused of sexually assaulting a young child.
A preschool-aged boy made an outcry to the mother, saying he was sexually assaulted by Kelley on 2 occasions.
Well, I think it's obvious that the court of public opinion is as decisive and vicious as it has ever been in our culture today, because people are deemed guilty by the judge, jury, and executioner of Twitter or Facebook or whatever before there's even charges filed. These days, if there's even a rumor, your life can be ruined. Gaebri, I think especially about you at this point in the story, you're going into your senior year too, right? At that point? And
yes.
Teenagers are not known for being very nice and gracious people, generally. So what kind of stuff did you face as the girlfriend of this man?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the times we try to highlight all the good stuff, but there were definitely, the Twitter trolls and Instagram comments and Facebook posts. And there are people that were honest, they were really good friends in high school that kind of switched over to being like, oh my gosh, he did this, and posting about him. And I think the most nerve-wracking thing was me going back to school without Greg. I had to go through my senior year without him in the hallways. I remember being in my mom's office and just being like, I do not want to go out there. I don't know what people are going to do. And I'm getting emotional talking about it.
Yeah.
I just remember being so scared.
Greg was expelled from Leander High School and sent to the Williamson County Juvenile Justice Alternative Education Program for his senior year. It was a correctional school where students wear military uniforms and take orders from drill instructors. Meanwhile, Detective Daly and the DA's office were continuing to pursue Greg as the only suspect in the case. His mother, Rosa, knew that it was time to hire a lawyer, but she had no idea where to start. So Shama recommended an attorney named Patricia Cummings and offered to call her office on Rosa's behalf.
She put down a very high dollar sign to do it, and it really freaked us out and made us anxious because we just didn't have money.
How'd you pay for it?
My mom sold the house that we grew up in for cash to be able to pay for it. I mean, still to this day, it makes me emotional because that's the house where we've made a lot of memories.
In August 2013, the DA's office formally charged Greg with super aggravated sexual assault of a child, a charge that carries an especially harsh penalty because it only applies to child victims under 6 years old. If convicted, the minimum sentence is 25 years without the possibility of parole. The maximum penalty is life in prison. His attorney, Patricia Cummings, broke the news to Greg.
When she told me that, my heart sunk into my stomach. I remember I went to the bathroom and started throwing up. That's how sick I was to hear that.
Yeah.
That's me, Greg Kelley. I'm trying to tell you that I did not do this. I'm innocent of this. And you want to send me to prison for the rest of my life. I just felt so hopeless. I felt like they were just about to kill me, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was so scary, man.
What made this all especially scary for Greg was that no one in power seemed remotely interested in pursuing other suspects. From the very beginning, the authorities in Williamson County were locked into their narrative that Greg was guilty, and they seemed willing to overlook any evidence that posed a threat to their theory. Greg's name was originally brought into this heartbreaking case by the victim's father, who reported to Cedar Park police that his 4-year-old son said he was sexually assaulted at Shama's house by a big kid named Greg Kelley. The case was assigned to Detective Chris Daly, and the Showtime docu-series revealed that Daly didn't compile a list of people living in the McCarty house at the time of the assault. He didn't talk to any other adults in the house like Shama and her employees at the daycare, or even to her son, Jonathan McCarty. In fact, Daly never even visited the McCarty house to investigate the scene of the alleged crime. But the most striking omission is that Daly never asked the victim to identify Greg as the assailant. No one on Daly's team ever showed the child a picture of Greg. There was never any kind of lineup where the victim recognized Greg. Nothing. At one point, Detective Daly was asked, "What would you say is the ultimate goal of a police investigation of a criminal case?" His answer was telling. With no mention of justice or the truth, he responded, "Successful prosecution." What do you think, in terms of evidence, was most damaging to your case?
In terms of evidence, I mean, there was very little that could tie me to this crime. And that's kind of what we were trying to show you. Like, hey, I didn't do this. Go follow the facts and go see. And that's all I wanted was an investigation, because as a United States citizen, that's what I'm entitled to. That's my liberty, is the right to due process. If somebody's guilty, go and prove that they're guilty. But if somebody's telling you they're innocent, then you better go and make sure that all your ducks are lined up before you go and send an innocent man to prison.
Yeah. The only, I guess, real shred of evidence that led to the trial was the Outcry video of the first victim. And at some point along the journey, there was a second charge that was filed.
Correct. Yeah, immediately a month after the original charge, they came into my classroom, put me in handcuffs, took me to Williamson County Jail. And the next thing you know, I'm getting charged with not only one child, but two now. Oh my gosh. I just was broken. I didn't even know what to even say. I mean, like, at that moment, I felt like I was in the worst nightmare anybody could ever be in. Nobody's hearing me. Like, nobody's listening to me. Nobody's doing the investigation. They're just pursuing me. There's a big target on my back. That, and now the court of public opinion is saying, oh my gosh, he did it, this and that. So at that point, our town was getting completely divided from the people that loved me and that knew who I was, to the people that did not know me, that wanted to hop on to the media. And it was terrible.
Disbelief tonight in Leander following a high school football player there accused of sexually abusing a second preschool-age child. Today, 18-year-old Greg Kelley.
Even the people closest to you admitted at that point they started to have doubts, because that's human nature.
Yeah.
You know how people think and how people might start to turn in their sentiments with a second accuser. Gaebri, how did the second accuser affect your mindset?
I think my mindset kind of just went to, oh my gosh, this is going to change everyone's mind now. But I still didn't doubt him. I still didn't think he did it. I just knew him too well, and I knew what he isn't capable of and wouldn't do. I just was so scared of what everyone else was thinking now, because I didn't want to lose that support either. Sure. I didn't want him to lose that support.
That was enough for me to stay strong. I mean, I know how people think, and there's no woman out in the world that even compares to what type of woman Gaebri is, to be able to stay by me like that.
Right. I couldn't believe she stayed by you. I mean, you're a great guy and handsome and all that, but did they at any point come to you with any kind of a plea deal?
They did, yeah.
Days before Greg's trial, the prosecutors offered him 10 years probation, lifetime sex offender registration, minimal jail time, and some fines. But in exchange for that, he would have to admit in open court that he was guilty of sexual misconduct.
I was completely disgusted at that point that they were going to offer me probation when they're trying to literally plaster my life as the worst child predator that Williamson County has ever seen. To me, that doesn't seem like justice all around. So I'm going to go ahead and say no to that.
People who aren't from Texas will think that what I'm about to say is absolutely ridiculous, but I think that part of the Texas attitude, especially around sports and football and stuff, is that the worst thing you can possibly do is forfeit and just not show up to play.
True.
It's something in our psyche. True. It's better to show up and lose than forfeit. Did any of that kind of spirit play into that decision?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. I did not realize how much football and the lessons I've learned and the shootouts that I've had in the fifth quarter overtime in football games, and to just put your chin down and keep fighting until you go and you walk away with that win and that overtime in that football game. How much those lessons were imprinted on my heart and my mind, on my psyche, on my spirit. A lot of people would not have said no to that probation because, Williamson County has a 98% conviction rate at that time. Gosh. I promise you that there's probably hundreds of those cases where some people were innocent of what they were being accused of, but they were pressured into taking a plea deal because they knew that big bad Williamson County was going to blow their house down if they didn't. And so at that point, I knew that I was going to fight until the very end. I could not go out into the world and tell them I did something I did not do. I told them, I looked at my mom, and I remember my mom just breaking down. She started crying, man. She started weeping.
She wanted you to take it.
The only thing in her head was, they could kill you, Greg, if this goes wrong. I might never see you again. So I saw my mom breaking, as when you see your mom break, you start to break.
Of course.
So I called Gaebri, and I remember Gaebri, so strong-willed, she said, Greg, remember that we got to continue to fight. And I remember telling her, I just cannot go out there and say I did this. And we went to trial for 7 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
On July 7, 2014, a jury was chosen, and the trial of Texas versus Gregory Raymond Kelley began with the prosecutors arguing their case.
The defendant is a dedicated football player, a devoted boyfriend, safe around kids. He is who he needs to be in front of people.
The most incriminating evidence was the first child's testimony about the assault, which he gave by closed-circuit video from another courtroom. Greg watched from the defendant's table.
You promised to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, right?
Oh, man, I was so uncomfortable. It's so sad to see a kid have to be put in that situation, and then me being painted as the person who did this, what this kid is describing in this video, is something that's so unsettling. It's so disgusting.
But the second accuser's testimony didn't go as prosecutors planned. While on the stand, the boy fully recanted his allegations against Greg, which isn't surprising when you learn how officials obtained his outcry. After Greg was initially arrested, Detective Daly held a press conference asking any families whose children had been molested by Greg to come forward. According to the Showtime docu-series, after 4 days of nobody coming forward, Daly cold called one of the dads from the daycare and intimated that Greg may have molested his son. To be clear, the boy made no outcry before Daly placed that call, but upon hearing that his son may have been victimized, the father understandably allowed Daly to set up a meeting at the Child Advocacy Center. In 2 separate interviews with a social worker, the 4-year-old boy denied being mistreated or inappropriately touched by anyone at Shama's house, so Daly took it upon himself to step in and conduct a 3rd interview. By asking questions that were unordinary, if not unprofessional, Daly was able to extract an outcry from the boy. The interview was caught on camera.
My name's Chris Daly. I'm a police officer. How are you?
You see actually a police officer come into a room with a gun on his hip, no badge, sits down, and completely does something that is out of his policy. He started asking questions like, hey, when did Greg do this to you? You told me that Greg did this to you. What did you tell your mother? What was he making you do? And the kid is constantly saying, no, I don't know, no. Eventually, it got to a point where the kids knew that that's not what the police officer wanted to hear. So, a lot of child psychologists will back this up, but when that happens, then the kid finally starts saying yes. And he knew that, okay, now that's enough to go and pursue second charges for Greg Kelley.
A prosecutor in the DA's office told Daly that she wouldn't recommend filing charges based on the second child's outcry because of how it was obtained.
I would not be comfortable telling you to file charges, and he said, well, it'll strengthen the case against the first child.
But that didn't stop Daly.
I felt that Ellen was too scared to make an outcry. And since I had information that he was offended on as well, and the suspect was out in public, that it was a public safety concern.
Adding a second victim seemed to bolster the prosecutor's case. But the moment that child admitted on closed-circuit TV during Greg's trial that his accusation was untrue, Daly's hopes of a successful prosecution took a major hit.
Did you ever touch Greg? What's your answer?
No.
No? Okay. Did Greg ever show you any emotion?
Not only were they actually never in the courtroom, but they never actually properly identified me as the assailant. And that was a play on the DA's office for a reason. Because the last thing the DA's office wanted was to see a kid and say, I don't see that person here today.
So, Gaebri, I'm curious. I mean, you're there for the trial, right?
So they actually made me stay out of the room because I was going to go on stand as well. But whenever I went on stand, they barely asked me anything. Like, I didn't get to vouch for his character, who he was as a person or anything. So I wasn't actually in the room until the very last day.
Did either of you during the trial have any indication at all that maybe your attorney wasn't doing everything she could do to defend you?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%.
It's not even rocket science.
Yeah.
Everyone in the courtroom was like, what is going on? This is insane.
So much to just think back on. Like, you can clearly see the DA's office definitely create an agenda where they did not want people that wanted to vouch for my character to stay on the stand very long. We don't have evidence to prove that he did this crime, so what we're going to do is just paint him to be the person who did it. And so that's exactly what happened there. So when the DAs start playing that card, right, you have a defense attorney now that's supposed to say, oh, hold on a second, you're not going to play that card because I'm going to come back and rebuttal here. And Patricia didn't even create that avenue for that to happen. She pretty much went with the DA's office and just says, yeah, I don't have anything.
But she prepped us to go on stand. Like, we were going to answer all these questions, and then nothing happened.
What did you think then was her deal? Like, do you think she was just maybe a poor attorney, or what did you think was going on?
I have completely no idea. I mean, still to this day, we don't know why Patricia does the things she does.
I've been a lawyer for 23 years, and I've tried a lot of difficult cases. And I got to say, this has been the toughest one of my career. What a responsibility you have when you believe that your client is innocent. And on top of that, you know you're dealing with one of the most emotional topics, which is child sexual abuse. And then there's this hammer that the state has chosen to use, which is the super aggravated sexual assault, which means, by God, if we don't get it and the jury doesn't get it right, it means potentially a life sentence for my 19-year-old client.
In preparation for the trial, Patricia hired Alan Kern, a private investigator, to help build Greg's defense. After the trial, Kern testified under oath that he had shown Patricia side-by-side photos showing how Shama's son, Jonathan McCarty, looked remarkably similar to Greg, and that Patricia's response was simply, "We are not going to investigate Jonathan." Mr. Kern also testified that he thought Patricia had a conflict of interest because she had represented the McCarty family previously.
She represented all of Jonathan's brothers, not only in aggravated assault cases and robbery cases, but also sexual assault cases. So clearly there is conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
And because Shama McCarty was the person who recommended Patricia Cummings to me. This happened in Shama McCarty's house. They're friends. So I think Patricia came in that trial not trying to find the truth, not fully trying to defend me, but to have me walk.
So as you get ready for the verdict, did you think your chances were good?
You know, we were very optimistic. We were very positive. We felt like the DA just really didn't bring their case. They went out there and they just threw something at the wall, hoping it would stick. And I remember during deliberation, I sat there with my family and we just tried to not think about it. We tried not to talk about the trial. We just started trying to talk about memories and what we're going to do next week. And I remember it was coming nighttime and the jury has been hung for 12 hours.
In the documentary, Showtime interviewed one of the jurors. He explained how the jury was split 6-6 immediately following the trial. And as the hours went on, they went from 6-6 to 8-4 to 10-2 and then 11-1. That's when he became the lone holdout.
And I remember at that time, I was actually helping Patricia put all of her court documents and her files back into her car because we thought we're just going to go home for the night.
It was close to midnight when the judge told the jury to have friends or family bring them clothes and toiletries because they would have to be sequestered in a hotel, unable to go home until they reached a unanimous decision. The holdout juror later said this about that night.
I feel as though we were pressured not only by the other jurors, but by the judge to come up with a decision. And I didn't think that was right.
The pressure worked. He made his decision that night.
One of the bailiffs runs out of the county courthouse and says, "Hey, there's a verdict." We go back to the courtroom. 10 minutes later, as the jury members walk out of that deliberation room, 4 bailiffs walk out as well right before them and go and circle my table. And then comes the guilty verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Gregory Kelley, guilty of the offense of super aggravated sexual assault.
Gaebri, were you in the room?
I was, yeah. I remember going in there thinking, like, I'm so ready for this to be over. I'm so excited for what's next. We're going to go celebrate. I was so naive and just had no idea. And I remember them saying guilty, and my whole entire body just went numb. I remember, like, hearing screams, and Shama, actually McCarty, screaming and crying. That was such a unexplainable day.
Yeah. Greg, how did you react?
I don't even remember the judge saying guilty. I just remember me just banging my head on the table. I remember sliding it up and down, and I just said over and over again, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And it got louder and louder, and I just wanted people to hear me. Nobody was hearing me. Nobody was listening to me. I was so red, and I was so mad. I felt like I died. I felt like I was murdered. And I had to say goodbye one last time to my family, and I wanted to do it on my terms. You know, I wanted to blow them a kiss and say, you know what, we're going to keep fighting.
Greg was taken to a holding cell overnight to await sentencing. The next morning, just before the hearing, Greg was allowed to see his family. That's when his attorney walked in and said that the judge would give Greg the minimum sentence of 25 years in prison if he waived his right to appeal. If Greg had rejected the judge's deal, the jury could have sentenced him to 99 years in prison. He only had 5 minutes to decide.
And I looked at my family, and we started talking, and
yeah,
I specifically remember just looking over to my brother and saying, man, I don't want to make decisions anymore. I don't. It seems like I'm not making the right ones, and I feel like my life's over. What do you guys want me to do? Do you want me to get out when I'm 44? Or should I go out there and allow them to maybe potentially send me to prison where I don't ever get out? Do I sentence myself to 25 years and waive my right to appeal my trial? Or do I allow the same jury that just convicted me with absolutely no evidence to go and give me any number between?
I mean, you're already in a frazzled state of mind, to say the least. And, you know, your mom's probably pressuring you. So whenever people say, well, if he was innocent, he wouldn't have taken the deal. And I don't think that's true at all until you understand how stacked against you the deck feels.
Yeah.
And what an uphill climb innocence would be, even if you are innocent. But did it ever cross your mind, like, did you ever ask in that moment, like, why are they so afraid of me appealing?
Right. That's a good question. I was never identified in trial. And I remember asking Patricia at that moment, what are my chances to win this thing? What are my chances to appeal this thing? And she simply says, I don't know. And so I look to my family, and we ultimately, as a group, decide to take 25 years without appealing because I wasn't certain that I would win this thing, right? You just don't know anymore. Clearly, the justice system has failed you, and it's completely broken. How are you going to go and trust it? How are you going to go and trust it to go and fix itself and to admit that they're wrong? That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It would take a miracle. But at that time, Patricia did not tell me where it mattered the most. She did not tell me that I was never identified in trial. That right there would have got me home in 30 days. That would have won my direct appeal.
Yeah. I mean, there's no DNA evidence. You were not living at the house at the time. You were never identified physically. Like, there's so much wrong with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Gaebri, at this point, are you starting to think maybe I should move on with my life?
No, not at all. That's the opposite of what I was thinking. I was thinking we need to figure this out and we got to fight and we need to get a good attorney. Yeah. And no, it was just an uphill fight from there.
While Gaebri and Greg's family prepared to keep fighting for justice, Greg began his fight to survive behind bars.
Oh, it was terrifying. The life expectancy of a child molester is not years, it's days.
What?
No, they get rid of them. I'm telling you, especially in Texas prisons, it's the most scariest and frowned upon thing that you can go to prison for. I found myself having to defend my life each and every day.
Greg remembers hitting rock bottom while sitting alone in his cell, many miles away from everything and everyone he'd ever loved. It was then, when he had no one and nothing else, that Greg, at 18 years of age, finally gave God his full attention.
The first time I ever read the Bible cover to cover was my third day in jail. I'm not going to say that I wanted to read it. Like I at that point, I was still angry. And at that point, I had so much hate in my heart. But quite frankly, it was literally the only thing I could read. That's what they give you while you're in there. When you get convicted, all they do is give you, here's a fresh set of clothes, here's a Bible, here's your towel, and here's some soap. And that was probably the best thing that they could give anybody. Because I read that thing cover to cover in like 2 days.
Wow.
And then I read it again like a week later. I read it about 4 times cover to cover. But little did I know, my life, my hope, and the word, all these seeds were just starting to get planted into my heart just to keep going.
What was it that you found in the Bible that gave you that hope?
I started reading it first in the New Testament just to get to know who Jesus was, what he did. And then I read the Old Testament, kind of like the history of Jesus. And I love the Old Testament stories of Joseph and Joshua and people like Joseph and Job who really just got tried and tested. And on some cases, wrongfully accused, casted away for 25 years, 50 years, gone for a whole lifetime. And then more towards the end of his life, he started receiving everything back sevenfold. Yeah. Same thing with Job. So reading those stories was necessary in times like that for me because I could relate.
Yeah, and if Joseph never went through that, the Israelites wouldn't have had a place to land in Egypt during the famine. Like, all these things work together in the grand scheme that you don't see in the day-to-day minutia and the day-to-day struggles. And sometimes today's wrongful accusation and today's suffering, it leads to something much greater that you can't even envision yet.
Greg settled into his new routine at the WIN unit in Huntsville, Texas. He took college classes, he went to chapel every week, and he eventually moved into a faith-based unit where he was surrounded by other inmates who were Christians.
And they were like, man, look, we're not here to judge you, brother. I'm sitting here, we want to make sure that you're equipped for what's to come, not only physically, right, but also spiritually, because you're going to be going through some spiritual battles.
Were these
like
chaplains?
These were inmates.
Inmates.
These are inmates. These were guys that at one point, maybe when they were 18, 19 years old, made a mistake, and now they're 40 years old. Those were the guys that were my best friends. I consider them my brothers in Christ. They filled me up with the word. You know, they made sure that hope that I needed never died.
Gaebri, I'm curious, as he's inside starting to serve the sentence, what's life like for you at that point?
When he first went in, I was terrified. We didn't get to speak for a while because he had to get into the system. And we started off with letters. And I was like, I've never written a letter to anybody. Like, this is so foreign to me. And
like pen to paper letter?
Yes. Oh, we have hundreds of letters.
The U.S.
Hundreds.
Postal Service.
Yep, where you wait a few days to get it. Yeah, and our relationship, it was so different because, I mean, not that our relationship before was all physical, but there was no physical. Like we had none of that, no holding hands, no kissing, none of those things that most relationships almost revolve around. We had to discover this whole other side to our relationship.
Wow.
And it was kind of beautiful in a way. I mean, at first it was super annoying because it was just so hard.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful to see, like Greg said, he 100% had this like faith transformation in prison. And I do believe that all those brothers in Christ were angels. And I think they really protected Greg, and I think they taught him so much. And it was really beautiful looking back of the transformation we had and how deep we dove into our relationship and how God really became the center of it.
I'd love to hear one of those letters. Is that asking too much?
No, yeah, I can do that.
Do you have one handy?
I do. I have two different ones, but I'll read.
Do you want me to read it since I'm reading it to you?
Do you want to do it with your voice?
Okay.
Whoever wrote
He
the
wrote
letter.
the letter.
Okay.
Yeah, you wrote it.
I wrote it. I start off saying, during the summertime here in prison is a hot time of year. One of the greatest ways to mentally leave this place is to take a notice of God's beautiful creation. Even though every inmate never finds time to stop sweating, God's beauty still remains. Every day during the spring and summer, as I came back from work, I would take the long walk from the factory to the building. As my coworkers and I took the long walk, we always passed the beautiful garden that sat right outside the landscaping shop. The garden was full of lilies, tulips, roses, and other captivating flowers. In the midst of a place I did not belong, I always found victory in imagining that I was picking a beautiful flower and handing it to my Gaebri, explaining to her that I see you as I see this flower. Even though the flower is a pleasing image to look at, it has great purpose. The flower is giving. It supplies the bees with nectar. The flower is enduring as it takes the beatings of the hot sun, and the flower is always expecting, coming in the summer and leaving in the winter. It never changes. God does not just create things to be pleasing to our eye or even to be put into use, but also to prove his existence. It starts with having eyes to see and ears to hear. After allowing God to remove a veil that was covering my eyes for so many years, I now see how amazing Jesus Christ is. I now see that I, Greg Kelley, along with the whole world, was a creation in his image. So now I leave you with a question. If God creates something as beautiful as the skies, animals, and flowers, how much more beautiful are you? To Gaebri Anderson. I love you, Greg Kelley.
There were hundreds of those.
I can't even believe I wrote that too.
Yes, beautiful.
That letter right there was a byproduct of when I was seeking God the most in my life. It's a testimony that we should each and every day.
Yeah, it was powerful.
My nickname growing up was the Mouth of the South from my grandfather. That didn't use that in an endearing way. I was the kind of kid that you could be pounding me and I'm still talking crap the entire time. I was a mouthy kid. And so
God wasn't just working on Greg's heart inside that prison. He was working miracles on the outside too, sending two men into Greg's life as guardian angels. One of those men was Jake Bryden, a father of three who owns a construction company in Austin. Jake first heard about Greg on the evening news, hours before the jury delivered the verdict.
The Williamson County man on trial for sexual assault will soon learn his fate.
19-year-old Gregory Kelley is accused of having
I went to bed and I literally was like, Lord, if he's guilty, get him convicted. And if he's innocent, set him free. It was one of those just little fleeting prayers. And I remember that like it was yesterday, because when I woke up the next morning and heard that they had found him guilty, I was like, well, guess that settles it, man. He must have been really guilty for them to be able to convict him with what I saw on the stand from Daily. So I went to work that day and I started seeing stuff on social media that was shock and awe. People were going, I can't believe they found him guilty. I can't believe they found him guilty. And I had a buddy called me and said, man, have you heard about the Greg Kelley case? He said, my daughter went to school with Greg and she sat through the trial every day and it was awful. And it just completely lost her faith in the justice system. I said, well, Kevin, how'd they get a conviction when this cop sat up there and lied on the stand? He said, I don't know. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? He said, there's nothing we can do. And that bugged me, because if that's true, if this kid is innocent and there's nothing that can be done, then this could happen to me. This could happen to my brother, my dad. And I kind of just started thinking along those lines of, well, if we were going to do something, what would we do?
That night, Jake turned on the local news again, and that's when he saw his old high school football coach, David Anderson, Gaebri's father, reacting to the conviction. He immediately picked up the phone and called Coach Anderson, who was convinced that Greg was going to rot in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Jake sensed that God was calling him to get involved somehow, and the very next day, Jake arranged a meeting with Greg's mom, Rosa.
I said, Miss Kelley, I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about your son, but if he's innocent of this, I'll do everything I can to make sure that we get this turned around. And she looked at me and just said, you're the answer to my prayers. And I'm like, oh, I hope not. And I walked into the other room to just kind of evade the pressure, because she was formally anointing me in that moment. Like, you're the guy. She's like, I come from nothing. I have no voice. You have the voice. And I'm like, oh, great.
I just want to hug my boy and feel his heart beating into my heart. That is what I'm waiting for the hug.
Jake doesn't even know me. He doesn't know my family. He doesn't even know me from Adam. And he literally tells my mom that I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm being called to this. My spirit grieves for your son, Miss Kelley, and we're going to do what we can. So he steps in every way.
So the first thing that happened was I told David, I said, listen, I'll donate 10 grand. That'll get you started. But then you guys are going to have to raise a bunch of money and go hire an attorney. And David called me back that afternoon and said, hey, Patricia has gone and dropped off all of her files at Keith Hampton's office, and they're recommending that we hire him for the appellate work. And I said, don't do that. do not go with the person that the defense attorneys recommended, because if she screwed up, he's not going to go there. And Dave goes, you're a businessman. You got a good head on your shoulders. Just come with us and let's just go talk to him about it. So we pull up in the driveway of this little office on a Sunday, and I see one of these electric style, hybrid cars with a big Hillary bumper sticker on the back. And I looked at David and I said, there's no way this is our guy. I mean, we're in agreement on that, right? He's like, yeah, no way. And then within 10 minutes, it was one of those deals that we just knew he was our guy. It felt very ordained, and the guy's just a genius. And man, did he come through in a major way.
Keith Hampton was Greg's second guardian angel. Jake calls him the Bill Belichick of criminal appellate law. He has defended clients before the U.S. Supreme Court, and he once even saved a client from the death penalty hours before the lethal injection was administered. Keith's only prerequisite for taking a case like Greg's is that he has to believe his client is innocent. Jake also wanted to be certain of Greg's innocence before getting more involved, so he told Keith,
if you think that there's any possibility that he did this, I need you to tell me, because I'm stepping out on faith here, but I have not verified anything about this man's character. I know nothing about him, and I'm going to ride or die with you, because I like the fact that you're not just an attorney for hire, that you really care about what happened here. So Keith went inside the jail to meet with Greg, and Keith has a way of he's got some tests that he runs on people, and he can pretty much tell when somebody's got some guilt or innocence, and he walks out and he's got a smile on his face. And I sneak out behind and go talk. I said, what do you think? He goes, man, not only is he innocent, that's a great young man.
This young man is not guilty of this crime. There was no evidence brought against him that should be allowed in court at all. There's nothing but hearsay. Not a single shred of real evidence.
Within a few days of Greg's conviction, Jake, armed with a megaphone, led a rally outside Leander High School. 200 people showed up in support of Greg.
We gotta fight, guys. We gotta fight this, and we can't stop. Yeah.
And I thought, okay, this is what we have. This is all we have. And let's just see what God can do with that. And he came through in a big way.
Justice for Greg! Justice for Greg! Justice for Greg!
That group of supporters grew from hundreds to thousands of people, most of whom didn't even know Greg. And for nearly 3 years, as Greg sat in prison, Jake kept the group active with weekly video updates on their Facebook page.
Hello, and thank you for always fighting for Greg Kelley. Today is a very big day. I know you've been patiently waiting for an update. We have a very big one for you. Well, hello and good morning. I wanted to take a minute and let everybody know how grateful we are that you've stood with us, that you've supported this foundation, as well as that you have fought for Greg Kelley.
Williamson County officials, perhaps feeling threatened by the group that wouldn't let anyone forget about Greg Kelley, publicly accused them of being a cult.
It was a faith-defining time in my life, because prior to that, you know, I grew up in church. My dad's a pastor, but I had a lot of personal doubt as to what God's involvement in our day-to-day lives actually was. And this was one of those moments in my life where I could tell that, no, he's very interested. He's actually involved, and he's pulling people together.
Hey, fighters, tomorrow is the first day of early voting. You know, when we started this, Jana Duty was running a conviction mill, and so true criminals would come in, they'd plead guilty, they'd get very light sentences, and anybody that bucked that system paid the price. At this point going forward, what we care about in Williamson County more than anything is that we have elected officials that listen to people, not label them.
In 2016, Jake encouraged Greg's supporters to vote for Sean Dick to replace Jana Duty, the district attorney who was responsible for prosecuting Greg's case. Sean won the election, which opened the door for Greg's new lawyer, Keith Hampton, to present all the new evidence that he'd unearthed since Greg's conviction.
So I gave up my opportunity to appeal my trial, but not to find new evidence. And at that point, Keith, he wanted to make sure that every stone was flipped over. So he dug into my life even more. You know, they took my cell phone away, something that never really got looked into, that proved that I was never at that house. I moved out a month before and accounted for every day that I could not have done this crime. I was actually not there through GPS coordinates of my photos, my text messages, and the actual date that they said this assault took place. I was actually driving to my brother's house, who lives 40 minutes away, helping him move the whole day. So,
stuck in traffic, I remember.
Stuck in traffic, taking a selfie, sent it to Gabe, saying how frustrated I am, stuck in traffic. And so Keith actually did the legwork that the Cedar Park Police Department did not do to prove my innocence.
Keith gathered all the new evidence proving Greg's innocence and presented it to the new DA in the form of a writ. Unlike Jana Duty, Sean Dick was open to the idea that Williamson County may have put the wrong man in prison and that a child molester could still be on the loose. So he asked the Texas Rangers to do an independent investigation to verify Keith's findings, essentially reopening the case.
Particularly, I'm interested to hear the defense, Patricia Cummings, and I'm interested to hear the Cedar Park Police Department, and just kind of hear how the investigation went along and what their thought process was going through this. To me, this really is a search for the truth.
A district judge issued a bench warrant ordering Greg Kelley to leave the state prison in Huntsville and return to Williamson County for an upcoming hearing.
On August 2nd, 2017, 3 years into his 25-year prison sentence, Greg had one final chance to prove his innocence in the same courtroom where he originally stood condemned.
Today, the first day of a 3-day hearing, as former Leander High School football star Greg Kelley begins his quest to have his conviction for a child sex crime overturned.
Greg's fate was in the hands of State District Judge Donna King. Would she uphold his conviction, order a new trial, or declare him innocent?
All right, good afternoon. This is cause 131367 K26A. Ex parte Gregory Raymond Kelley. All right, Mr. Hampton, are you ready to proceed?
I am, Judge. The purpose of this hearing is to bring in the stuff that we haven't examined.
During the writ hearing, the Texas Ranger assigned to Greg's case revealed that there were now 3 suspects, including Jonathan McCarty, Shama's son, the one who looks a lot like Greg. At the time of the hearing, Jonathan was behind bars for unrelated charges.
I mean, there was a facial resemblance that is undeniable, which really adds more mystery to why in the world he was never questioned or considered a suspect in this case. He lived in the house, and all of that is shocking to me, especially considering that while you were in prison, Jonathan McCarty raped a 15-year-old girl. And I couldn't help thinking that if the police had been looking into him initially, like they probably should have, that could have been prevented as well. He was released in February, still hasn't been investigated as far as I know for the initial crime against the young boy. I imagine that's got to be infuriating for you both.
Absolutely. It is. KXAN has obtained a letter from Police Chief Sean Mannix shortly after Kelley was convicted. It defends the investigation and explains why no other suspects were sought out. He says detectives stayed focused on Kelley because that's how a proper investigation is conducted. He went on to say, when a small child makes an honest outcry that someone molested them and named their known attacker, it would be gross incompetence to try to take them down a different path.
Family and friends of Greg Kelley say it's just a matter of time before he comes home because of the evidence.
If I knew all these facts at that time, he would not have been tried for the offense.
Williamson County District Attorney Sean Dick says the facts don't point to Kelley.
Judge Donna King today asked attorneys to get her information that she needs to make a decision about his bond. Judge King is also going to be working on recommendations that she will make to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals about whether or not to overturn Greg Kelley's conviction or even to possibly declare him innocent.
The writ hearing lasted 3 days, and in the end, Judge Donna King ruled that Greg was innocent, that his trial attorney, Patricia Cummings, had been ineffective, and that he was denied due process by a deficient police investigation. After spending 1,153 days behind bars, Greg Kelley was released on bond. He walked out of prison wearing a T-shirt that read, "My story, his glory."
It's been it's had its ups and downs for the past 3 years. And it's a new beginning for me. I know it's not over yet, but we're going to continue fighting and the truth will prevail. And I just thank the DA's office, the judge, to give me an open mind to allow me to finally come home to my family. And I just want to go home.
But Greg was far from a free man. Now he had to wait for 9 judges on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to determine if they agreed with Judge King's ruling. But Greg and his family knew there was a good chance he would be heading back to prison since the appeals court rarely overturns a conviction. While he waited, Greg wasn't allowed to move forward with his life. He couldn't work or even apply to college. He couldn't play football. Any plans that he wanted to make for his future were put on hold.
What was that like to just be waiting in a holding pattern?
It was like a dark cloud over my life. I mean, I already know what it feels like to be torn away from my family. And now I'm kind of getting a glimpse of hope that the truth is going to be revealed.
Yeah.
I'm now home and I get to be home while we continue to fight. But in some sense, on a psychological level and an emotional level, it's even more painful because I'm getting a taste of what it feels like to laugh with your family, to sit down and have a dinner with them. But at the same time, it's like this little scene in the back of your head, like, what if what happened to me happens again? It's going to make it even more painful. Yeah. It was always that feeling in the pit of your stomach, like, will all this be taken away again if they do the wrong thing?
Greg lived with that pit in his stomach for over 2 years.
It was from the very beginning of me getting released that every Wednesday at 9 a.m. we checked that Court of Criminal Appeals hand-down list to see if I'm on it as relief granted or, in the worst case, for me to go back to prison.
Yeah.
And we did that for like 80-something weeks straight.
Crazy.
And November 6th of 2019 at 9:01 a.m., Gaebri and I were
Eastern time.
Gaebri and I, Eastern time. Specifically, Gaebri and I, we were living in New York at the time. She was up there participating in a professional semester at the Broadway Dance Center, continuing her dance education. And actually, Pat, he came up with his documentary crew every Wednesday. And I turned on my little Fire Stick. I went to the Court of Criminal Appeals website. And I knew that if I was going to be exonerated by the Court of Criminal Appeals, I was going to be at the very top of the list under the category relief granted. And right when I pulled that up, I just scrolled down maybe 3 inches and it said relief granted, and then right under it said Gregory Raymond Kelley.
Wow.
Relief granted.
Finally. Thank God.
God text Gaebri. Woo, man.
I broke down. I felt more free than I've ever felt in my life.
I can only imagine. Did you call Gaebri right away?
So we had this thing where we talked about it, and while she was in class, I would actually text her an emoji of a bunch of birds, and that meant freedom.
Freedom.
And I remember specifically typing it over and over and over again, and she immediately ran out of class. She ran out back to our apartment, and we embraced each other.
This is all over.
I ran so fast, I don't have breath.
This nightmare is over.
I'm excited. Thank God.
Thank God.
Gaebri, how'd you feel?
That was the best text message I've ever gotten in my life. I can say that. I was literally running down the streets of New York. Like, my stuff was falling out of my bags. I don't even know where that stuff went, and ran in and hugged him. And it just felt like this biggest weight had been like lifted off of our shoulders. And we were finally able to go on with life after all these years, and we could have a future together. And it was just honestly the happiest day. Happiest day.
He's been out on bond now for a couple of years while this whole appeals process has played out. And today that came to an end. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has just ruled in his favor, overturning the guilty verdict against him, essentially saying Greg Kelley didn't do it.
The former Leander High School football player convicted of sexually assaulting a child will not go back to prison.
A major decision today from the state's highest criminal court undoes the conviction of Greg Kelley and clears his name once and for all.
This is Keith Hampton reacting to the news.
When I read, I had to read the phrase relief granted 2 or 3 times before I punched my cell phone. First call, of course, was to Greg. I just needed to reassure him that everyone on the Court of Criminal Appeals voted in favor of granting him relief. So at least he can move on. He's been in limbo, you know? He's been checking in with a bondsman for the last 2.5 years. He couldn't play ball. He suffered these last 2 years.
7th, 2019. Greg and Gaebri were back in Texas for Greg's exoneration hearing, where Judge King officially declared his innocence.
I declare you innocent and that you are fully exonerated.
And Greg, who was then 24 years old, gave his emotional testimony.
The night I was convicted and thrown into a cell, just in this county jail right next door, I was scared for my life. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what my fate was. I didn't know if I was going to be alive to see my family. I was absolutely terrified of a prison. The night I was put in that cell, I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ. I desperately begged God to intervene. I knew nothing about him. Couldn't quote a scripture. Couldn't tell you who Jesus was. Day after day, as I sat alone in my cell, all alone, I fell in love with getting to know Jesus through his word. Because he was a place I could find peace in the middle of dealing with hate. I asked him to save me. He did every bit of that. There on that cell floor, And now here this morning, you asked me how I did it. It was solely love of Jesus Christ. James 2-4 says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. God has the ability to change a situation, a life, and a heart. My story is His glory. Thank you.
We're not finished yet. We started with a promise of, number one, exoneration for Greg. Number two, hold the people accountable that did this to Greg. And there's a lot of pending litigation right now. So we're not going to finish until we complete it, because the third part was make sure it couldn't happen to anybody else in this community. And if we don't make an example out of those guys, then all we've done is we've saved one person, but we haven't fixed the problem.
There's something profound about what Jake did for Greg, something godly. Remember, Jake isn't a lawyer. He works in construction. He runs a business and takes care of his family. And he didn't even know Greg before seeing his story on the local news. Most people would have just changed the channel, but Jake changed a life. And Jake's calling to seek justice didn't end with Greg Kelley. Today he's fighting for others that he believes have been wrongfully accused. And he's working to educate jurors about the threshold of proof that a guilty verdict requires.
What was it like for you, though, even before you received your justice, to wake up every morning and just feel like your life was wasting away in the prime years as an athlete, as a football player? Even after you got exonerated, looking back to the time wasted, how do you get over that?
I get over it by knowing that my story and my life was written a long time ago. I look at my life like a chapter book, where in the beginning of the book, Greg Kelley was a high school kid playing football, hoping to get out of Leander, Texas and play ball, but his life gets completely derailed, has to face this injustice, this nightmare, had to fight for his life with a beautiful family by his side who believed in him, a town divided, being painted as a monster, but gets to see his time in court 6 years later, proving his innocence, trying to get football back now, going to college, but you cannot control the cards that are dealt to you in life. But what you can do is how you react to them. For a long time, I had the question of why is this happening to me? Why? And until I started using what is God trying to show me in this situation. And when I started asking that question, I knew that I was being filled with strength to get through this trial that is actually promised to us in the Word. Jesus actually tells his disciples that in this world you will have trouble, but he says to take heart in him because he's overcome the world.
Wow.
A lot of people, they get falsely accused, wrongfully convicted. They either kill themselves in prison, they give up, and they serve the rest of their time as an innocent person. But that's not what happened in my case. What happened in my case is that we chose to fight and have faith. And at the end of this, we saw the other side, and now we can glorify God to the whole world on what he did.
Is that what forgiveness looks like for you after everything y'all have been through? I mean, some people think forgiveness means a sweet encounter and reconciliation with those who wronged you. It sounds like forgiveness to you means glorifying God in spite of everything.
Yeah, it's literally choosing to put on Christ each and every morning. It's choosing to take those thoughts captive and crucify yourself to the cross each and every day. Because myself, I wanted to go and hoop and holler and maybe cuss everybody out. It's the human nature in me to go and throw a pity party and say, you know what, you took all this from me.
Yeah.
But I'm choosing to do it in a righteous way. I'm choosing to do it in holding people accountable that don't want to take responsibility for their action, because accountability at the end of the day is everything. Jesus, he loves us very much, but at the same time, he expects us to hold ourselves accountable each and every day, to pick up our cross And what that means is to count the cost and get out there and be a light to the world. That's exactly what it looks like to me. Is forgiveness is not just for the people that did me wrong, but it's for me. Yeah. It's for me to continue to go and live the life that is fully free.
Amen. Just a few months after his miracle exoneration, Greg and Gaebri were married in Austin, Texas, surrounded by everyone who'd stood by them through their 8-year ordeal.
The best decision of my life was sticking by your side and fighting for you, fighting for us. I'm so proud of you and so happy we never gave up on us. I love you, GK.
You are a gift from God to make me a better man every day. I vow to cherish your heart and guard it with due diligence. I will make it my mission to have it overflow with confidence that I love you with all of mine. I vow to keep these promises, write them on my heart, and to measure myself daily until death do us part.
Both of Greg's guardian angels played a role in their wedding. Jake officiated the ceremony.
Well, with the power vested in me by the great state of Texas, God, and the Court of Criminal Appeals, I pronounce you man and wife. Greg, you may kiss your bride.
And Keith Hampton announced the couple for the first time as husband and wife.
It's my pleasure to give to you, for the first time anywhere, Mr. and Mrs. Greg and Gaebri.
And 2 months ago, at age 25, Greg finally got the chance to fulfill his dream of playing Division I football by earning a full scholarship from Eastern Michigan University.
If you look at Greg's story now from a 1,000-foot view, it's a really cool story. And Greg is going to get to walk through the rest of his life never doubting his Creator's love for him, because there was mountains moved for him to feel that love. And you know what? That's probably what it would have taken for Greg to feel that love.
When Andrea, Julie, and the rest of our Maybe God team decided to tell Greg's story, I envisioned an episode about a broken legal system, corrupt officials in power, and an innocent man's plea for justice. I never imagined we'd be telling a love story. But then I saw how Gaebri looks at Greg, how she never left his side, even during his 3-year prison stay. And I saw love. Then I heard the pain in Rosa's voice, the deep agony of a mother whose baby's in trouble, and I heard love. I witnessed 2 guardian angels putting their lives on hold to restore an innocent man's good name, and it was so clear that love was the reason. Their innate love of justice, of seeing the truth win. How does love move through prison walls? How does a mother's love move mountains? How is it possible for someone to love a person they've never met? Maybe it's because we've all been made in God's image. And maybe God is love. I can't make sense of it all in my head, but in my heart, I just know one thing. Greg Kelley is a free man because of love. This episode of Maybe God was produced by Andrea Gentle, Julie Miller-Courtois, and Eric and Giovanna Huffman. Our phenomenal editors are Shannon Steffen and Justin Mayer. Maybe God's photographer and social media guru is Kat Bruff. Thanks for listening, everybody.